In today's video, which one was the worst prison, Alcatraz or Devil's Island? Right in the middle of San Francisco Bay, there's a small island surrounded by freezing water and violent currents. For decades, it was considered the most secure prison in the history of the United States. Its name became a synonym for maximum security, Alcatraz. But thousands of miles away, deep in the jungle of French Guyana, there was another prison, a place so brutal that the prisoners themselves gave it a terrifying nickname. They called it the Dry Guillotine. Alcatraz and Devil's Island became famous for the same reason. Getting in was easy. Getting out seemed impossible. But even though their reputations sound similar, the reality of these two prisons was completely different. While one became known for preventing escapes, the other became infamous for something much worse, a system where thousands of men simply disappeared. Some died from disease, others from exhaustion, and many were never seen again. That raises a question almost nobody asks. Which of these two prisons was actually worse? To answer that, we need to start with the most famous one, a prison built in the middle of the ocean to solve a very specific problem. Criminals the prison system simply couldn't control. The impossible prison, Alcatraz. In the center of San Francisco Bay, there's a small rocky island. For a long time, it was used as a military fortress, but in 1934, the United States government decided to turn it into something different, a federal maximum security prison. The goal was simple: create a place capable of holding the most dangerous prisoners in the country, men considered violent, undisciplined, or simply impossible to control in other prisons. Among the inmates who passed through Alcatraz were some of the most famous criminals of the 20th century. One of them was Al Capone, the legendary boss of the Chicago Mafia. But the real strength of Alcatraz wasn't just the walls or the bars, it was the environment itself. The water in San Francisco Bay is extremely cold. Even on warmer days, the temperature rarely goes above 53 Fahrenheit, which is about 12 degrees Celsius. The currents are strong, and the tides change quickly. That means even an experienced swimmer would struggle to make it to shore. And there was another detail. From the cell windows, prisoners could see the city of San Francisco, the lights, the cars, life happening on the other side of the water. The city was just a little under 3 miles away, close enough to see, but far too far to reach. That was the real psychological power of Alcatraz. Freedom was always visible, but always out of reach. For decades, the prison built a very simple reputation: nobody escaped the rock. But in 1962, 3 men decided to prove that maybe that wasn't true. A legendary escape. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. The 3 men were inmates at Alcatraz when they started planning an escape that would go down in history. The plan started with something small. Behind the sinks in each cell, there were openings that led to a maintenance corridor. The prisoners realized those walls weren't as solid as they looked. For months, they slowly worked to widen the holes. The tools were improvised: metal spoons, pieces of scrap iron, and even a motor stolen from a vacuum cleaner turned into a kind of drill. To hide their progress, they created fake vents made from paper and soap. During the day, everything looked normal. But the plan had an even more impressive detail. To fool the guards during the night, the 3 men created fake heads. They were made from papier-mâché, painted to look like skin, and topped with real hair taken from the prison barbershop. Placed on the pillows, they looked like prisoners sleeping. on the night of June 11, 1962, the plan finally went into action. After the lights went out, the three men left their cells through the holes behind the sinks. They moved through the maintenance corridor, climbed up to the roof of the prison, and from there made their way down to the water. To cross the bay, they used a homemade raft built from dozens of stolen raincoats. The next morning, the guards did the routine head count. That's when they noticed something strange. 3 prisoners weren't responding. When the guards entered the cells, the fake heads were still in the beds, but the men were gone. The Federal Bureau of Investigation launched a massive investigation. For years, agents tried to figure out what had happened. The official conclusion was that the 3 probably died in the freezing water of the bay. But there's one curious detail. The bodies were never found. Decades later, reports began appearing that the Anglin brothers had been seen living in Brazil. Whether that's true or not, no one knows. But while Alcatraz became famous for preventing escapes, there was another prison where escaping wasn't the biggest problem. The real challenge was simply staying alive. Devil's Island, the dry guillotine. Long before Alcatraz gained international fame, France had already created a much more brutal prison system. In 1852, the French government established a penal colony in French Guyana on the northern coast of South America. The system became known as Devil's Island. But in reality, it was made up of several islands and labor camps spread across the region. For almost a century, around 70,000 to 80,000 prisoners were sent there. The official idea had 2 goals: punish criminals and at the same time colonize that remote region. But in practice, the system quickly turned into something very different. The climate of French Guyana was extremely hostile. Intense heat, constant humidity, and a jungle full of tropical diseases: malaria, yellow fever, typhus. These diseases spread quickly among the prisoners, and the men who survived them still had to face another brutal reality: forced labor. They were forced to cut trees in the jungle, carry heavy stones, and build roads under the burning sun. Food was scarce, medical care was practically non-existent, and punishments could be severe. As a result, the death rate was shocking. During some periods, up to 75% of prisoners died before finishing their sentences. Because of that, the place earned a dark nickname. The prisoners themselves called Devil's Island the Dry Guillotine. A slow execution. No blade, no final judgment, just time and the jungle. But the system had one more layer of cruelty, a rule that turned many sentences into something close to eternal. The never-ending sentence. Inside the French Guiana penal system, there was a law called doublage. The principle seemed simple. When a prisoner finished his sentence, he couldn't just go home. He was forced to remain in the colony. If the sentence was short, he had to stay in the region for the same amount of time after being released. But if the sentence was longer than 8 years, the result was even worse. The former prisoner had to remain in the colony for the rest of his life. In practice, that meant many men were condemned to never leave that place again, even after serving their sentences. One of the most famous cases connected to the system involved the French officer Alfred Dreyfus. In 1895, he was convicted of treason and sent to Devil's Island. His trial caused a massive political scandal in France and helped bring international attention to the brutal conditions of the penal colony. Over time, journalists and politicians began exposing the system. International pressure grew, and slowly the model started to collapse. Conclusion: which one was worse? The transportation of prisoners to French Guiana was officially abolished in 1938, but the penal colony kept operating for several more years. The last prisoners only left Devil's Island in 1953. Alcatraz kept operating for another decade, but in 1963, the prison was closed not because of scandal, not because of escapes, but because it had simply become too expensive to maintain. Today, both places are remembered as symbols of a brutal era of the prison system, but there's one fundamental difference between them. Alcatraz was built to prevent escapes. Devil's Island functioned as a system where the punishment itself often ended in disease, exile, or death. In Alcatraz, escaping seemed impossible, but in Devil's Island, surviving was already a miracle. Want to know more curiosities that can change your life, or not? Follow us here and on our other social media. It's all down below in the video description box. Also, leave your like and write in the comments what you thought of this video and what you want to know in a next video. And don't forget to send this video to anyone you think will enjoy it too.